Hello everyone, welcome to the first in a podcast series about cultural difference, traveling abroad, living internationally. Today I have my good friend Sean, so right now we're actually in Fredericksburg, which is where we met. We went to the University of Mary Washington and we were both really interested in cultures and foreign languages, and we met in the study abroad office.
We did, so long ago.
Because I think we were both, at least I was recruited to work in the study abroad office. Were you?
I think when I met you, I was just interested in studying abroad, but I hadn't actually gone abroad yet. But then afterwards
Then you came back and worked in the office. Yeah, because I had studied in France, and then coming back from my trip, the office manager recruited me to work in the office, and that's how I met Sean. And so he's my first guest in my very first episode. Today we're going to talk about a couple of different topics having to do with traveling and living abroad and what it's like to be a foreigner abroad. So we're going to break it into 3 parts. The first part is all going to be about expectations versus reality of when you travel abroad or visit a country for the first time, because that's just a very common part of traveling, is you have a certain vision in your head and then you arrive in a place and it can be very different. The second topic is about home and what it feels like what does a home feel like? And funny enough, other countries can actually sometimes feel more like home than your home country. So we're going to talk about that and that process. And then the last topic is kind of the big one, about being a foreigner in a foreign country. Like, it's very weighty, but that topic of like fitting in, adjusting culturally, and everything that comes with just not being in your home space and navigating that. And we've both done that multiple times. So that'll probably be the big one.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so to start it off, we're going to talk about the expectations I think all of us have when we travel abroad. We, especially because of the media, we're very influenced how we think about other countries and other cultures. So I wanted to talk to Sean about this because he has lived in multiple countries. I've lived in France, but he's lived in 3 different foreign countries. And so I wanted to ask you about this and start with it. I thought it'd be a good first topic because you've had multiple experiences, and probably different, of like an expectation, and then you go to move to the country and it's different, and sometimes in more extreme ways than others. So we're going to talk about that to start. So to start it off, what was your most, maybe, do you want to start with a little summary maybe actually of each place?
That's a good idea, yeah.
Like each of the countries you've been to, and then like how expectation differed from reality?
Yeah, that's a good idea. So the first time I went abroad was in 2016, which feels like forever ago.
Yes.
And so that was to Bilbao, Spain. And for that was for, I guess, 4 months. It was September through December 2016. And that was my first time abroad. I'd actually never even been out of the country before that point, even on vacation or anything. So that was a completely new experience. And then my second experience was in 2018 to Paris, for 6 months from January to May 2018.
Right.
And then I lived in South Korea for 3 years, from August 2019 to August 2022. And then I actually just got back from Spain, where I round 2, where I got there in, I guess it was October 2022, and I just got back at the very end of May of 2023. So those are my experiences thus far. I'm sure there will be plenty more, but...
Yeah, and so can you talk a little bit about, because I know which country is the most, well, maybe I don't, like the most expectation built up about it versus what you found when you got there, especially for a country like France, where I live and have lived before, will be living again. It's such, like, in the cultural imagination, so built up, like especially Paris, and just the picture perfect and also very influencer based lifestyle. And then frequently you can arrive in the country and you're like, your own experience is very, very different, and sometimes there's some disappointment there, but maybe sometimes it's also different in a positive way that you weren't anticipating. So like, what was your most extreme or like cultural shock, I guess, of like what you thought it would be versus what you found when you got there?
So it's really funny. I feel like obviously Korea definitely is the most different culturally, but I think that almost made me go in having no expectations at all.
Right.
So I I actually didn't really experience any disappointment per se when I was in Korea, and I almost feel like...
Can I ask, did you have any expectations?
All I knew was honestly what I had seen from like K-pop and K-dramas. Okay. So obviously not a super accurate view, but because of that, I mean, I never met a Korean person. I never had Korean food. I'd never done anything to do with Korea. Okay. So yeah, I kind of went there and I just had no expectations whatsoever. Okay. And I almost feel like I didn't have any disappointments as a result. Whereas with, for example, Spain, we're into this. Because it is a Western country as well, and I feel like, as you said, we know a lot more about Spain, about France.
Yes.
We have a lot more expectations of, it's going to be this way. Mm-hmm. And I definitely had a lot of expectations about Spain, a lot of expectations about France, and I do feel like I had more disappointments for sure with Spain in comparison to France.
Well, let me stop you there really quick, because for me, I had a lot of thoughts about France going in because I already loved it so much as a place and was so interested in it. Before going to Europe, really didn't know anything about Spain. So what were some of the expectations you had about Spain? Like some of the stereotypes that you had in mind going there?
I would say for sure that people are very laid back.
Okay.
Which, after my experience, and we've talked about this, that was not my experience at all. I also felt like, and this is very interesting, I remember when I went to Korea, I got stared at a lot, but that is also normal because... Like, I'm visibly not Asian, right. So of course I'm going to stand out, and I kind of expected that.
Right.
But then in Spain, I also got stared at a lot.
Really?
And I was just like...
They could just tell you weren't from
Spain, I guess, yeah. And that was really...
That's so...
It was very bizarre, honestly. I don't know why that was, and that didn't happen to me at all in France, but it did happen in Spain.
Interesting.
So I don't quite understand why that was. But
I guess we should clarify, like... It totally depends on if you're going to this country and you're in a big city versus a smaller town. And like in Korea, you were in a pretty small town, and someone's experience in Seoul would be very
completely different.
But nonetheless, as a foreigner who's visually white, the racial origin is very clearly, like you said, not Asian. Like you are going to stand out.
Yeah.
And I guess that's something you probably... Were you anticipating that?
Oh, for sure. Okay. I definitely was expecting that, and that's why... In Korea, I was never really offended by people staring because it's like I'm probably the only foreigner they've ever seen in their life.
Okay.
For a lot of these people. But then in Spain, I mean, the town I lived in, it was actually pretty ethnically diverse. So I was like, why am I getting stared at? Like, you should be used to people who are not ethnically Spanish. That was just kind of a weird... that was a bit of a weird shock for me, for sure.
Okay.
So, I don't know. I still don't know why that was, but...
And it made you feel a bit out of place.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and culturally, like in Spain, for instance, you're talking about there was this expectation that there was this, like, I'll say it in French, I don't know how to say it in Spanish, but the laissez-faire attitude and like
no pasa nada.
That laid back kind of vibe, and you actually found that people were, I don't know, I wasn't there, but maybe pressed for time, or like what was the general feeling?
Yeah, I feel like because you always hear that in Spain, like people are very like no pasa nada, like don't worry about it, very chill. But that was not my experience. I felt like a lot of people were very stressed, and I don't know if it was about money. We kind of talked about that as well.
Very well be, yeah.
It's just, I don't know. And, working long hours, like a lot of people, they would work from like, 8 to 3, break 2 hours for lunch, come back at 5 and work until 7 or 8. So basically working all day, and that's not at all what I had expected.
Yeah, because you think about the long lunch break and getting off early, and it's like, just the carefree Spanish lifestyle, and people are actually having to like really make ends meet because their salaries are
so low,
and yet there's still like the EU level expenses that people have to pay.
Exactly, yeah. So that was a big shock for me. I was not expecting it to be so kind of, I don't want to use the word hardworking because I knew that they would be, but I didn't expect it to be so focused on work.
Right.
Definitely more so than I would say in like France, for example.
Right. Yeah, so maybe I should jump in and talk about my France experience because it's the most visited country in the world. Paris is the most touristic city in the world, which is crazy because I just love it on a personal level. So I don't think of it as being like the spot everyone wants to go, but it is, and because of that, there's a lot of cultural expectations. Like people go to Paris and they want the Paris that they've seen in movies.
There's actually, I don't know if you've heard about this, but there's something called Paris syndrome. Have you heard of this?
I have heard of this, actually.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Paris syndrome is basically specifically referring to Paris, but it can be really anywhere.
Okay.
Where you go there and you have such a strong mental expectation of what it's going to be, and then it doesn't fulfill that expectation, and you are very upset and you actually get depressed over it. It happens to a lot of Japanese tourists. They literally leave depressed because it didn't fulfill their expectations. So it's called the Paris syndrome.
And so the commentary I have on this is really funny because it met all my expectations.
Honestly, same for me too, yeah.
And, I don't know if that's unique to me because I guess, there's no way a place can meet every single person's expectations. But I was thinking about why was that the case? Because I definitely went to Paris, excited and having certain visions for myself there of, the student life and being able to sit in the cafes and walk along the Seine and just be in the beautiful surroundings and parks. And, I did all of that and I had a great time.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I don't remember being, disappointed with anything about my life there.
Same. I mean, you were there a lot longer than I was. I was only there for 6 months, but I feel the same way. I actually remember the first time I visited Paris was on vacation after Spain. And I remember I got to the airport, Charles de Gaulle, and I was going in the RER. And I remember thinking, it's going to be okay. It'll be fine. And then we went in and I saw the Eiffel Tower from the window of the RER train. And I was just like...
And your heart just melted
I was like, okay, it's kind of cool or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. Same for me. It's it has that, I don't know, just ability to really... What is it? Rose-colored glass. You just fall in love with it. And despite... the things that happen, all of the manif and all of the things that are going on that are not as pretty. I was thinking about why was it though that my expectations were met, because I've definitely been to other places, including Spain actually, just being and for different reasons, some places I've traveled to expecting to have this really one-on-one experience in the city, and then there's a million tourists and it just ruins the vibe.
Right.
And so I was why was Paris so perfect in my mind and so perfect in reality? And I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but it's somehow the branding of Paris I feel matches when you get there.
Yeah. And
it really is a beautiful city. It's not the pictures don't do it justice. It's very true to life. It really is
beautiful.
And all of the art, that's also a part of our consciousness. All of the different art that comes from France, seeing those paintings in museums, and then you go to the countryside of France and it matches. And so I think maybe that's why France is such a fun place. It's one of those places you can go and the reality does match the expectation. I mean, maybe that's rare.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Because I agree that for me, Paris and everywhere else I've been in France so far has pretty much matched my expectation of it.
Yeah.
So, I really don't know why that is, because maybe it's
strange.
I don't know. Maybe it's because going into Spain, I had a lot more expectations because I'd been studying Spanish for so much longer, and I'd heard a lot more about Spain directly, so maybe that's why I had higher expectations and why they weren't met as well. Whereas maybe for France, I just had more realistic expectations. Yeah. I don't know.
It's interesting to think about. And then I do want to put just kind of a qualifier in there. Is we're both white. You said, we can pass very easily in France. So our experience is going to be,
of course,
more privileged than a lot of other people.
We're also American.
We're American. So there is all of that. And we both speak French.
Yeah.
And that is a big one.
Yeah.
Because, if you don't speak French and you expect to go and have the same experience as someone who does speak French,
you're not going to.
Yeah. So there's definitely a way in when you have the language. That other countries, it might not be as big of a deal if you don't speak the language. But in France, it is. And there's a lot of respect, though, that comes with that. If you speak the language, there's a lot of respect for you as a foreigner.
And that's the funny thing, too, is I feel when I was in France, I don't remember anyone ever making fun of my accent or ever laughing at me.
No.
But that did happen to me several times in Spain, actually. And I know my Spanish isn't perfect, but I speak it pretty well.
You speak it fluently. Yeah, for years.
Yeah, and I know that I speak it really well. And there were some times where I'd say something wrong and people would laugh. And I get it to a certain extent, but it's also it's really kind of demoralizing when you put in so much effort and then someone's laughing at you. I'm just okay, I'm not going to learn your language then.
The biggest thing I would always get, no one making fun of my accent, but just being really interested in like, okay, you're not French, but where are you from? And I can't place the accent. Yeah. And so I always had very positive experiences with people because there's a curiosity there. And yeah, I always had a good time in France in that regard.
And I will say, going back to what you said earlier about how we're both white and that's affected our experience, I will say I do have a lot of friends of color who have also gone to France and also had really good experiences. So I think France in general, it seems like, hopefully, is a pretty welcoming place for most people. So I know that I've heard some definitely different experiences in Spain.
You're like, we can't just like
I know.
rag on
not
Spain
not trying to rag on Spain, but I have heard some conflicting reports on that as well.
I think in France too, but also depends really where you are.
For sure.
In Paris, a more metropolitan place that has so much diversity versus, you know,
the middle of the countryside.
The middle of the country that doesn't could be probably very different, but yeah, so it's different for everyone. I did want to throw in there before we move on to the next topic. So I studied abroad in France first for about 6 months, like Sean did, and then I went back and I did my master's for 2 years. So that's my France experience. And one of the ways that France didn't meet my expectations, but actually exceeded them. So I was like, oh yeah, sometimes expectations don't match reality in like a positive way. Is that, you know, going from America where I've only had one way of life in terms of transportation and my own mobility and access and independence is like, it's through driving. You know, I've never lived in a big city in America, so I've always driven everywhere. And being a younger person, that was my parents driving me around or, you know, me borrowing their car. And so when I went to France for the first time and I was in Paris and I had access to all this transportation, not just in the city, but I could take a high-speed train to pretty much anywhere I wanted to go.
For pretty affordable prices, too.
It was the first time in my life that I felt so independent and felt so able to do things on my own. And so because of that, felt really empowered. And that was just not something I was expecting. I was kind of expecting the opposite, to be honest. Like, you know, a stereotype of being a single, solo, female in a foreign city. I felt like I would have to really be on my guard, and I would even be more limited maybe than I was in America, and it was like the exact opposite. So that was a way that I was just so pleasantly surprised when I went for the first time.
Yeah, I can speak, I guess, to one of my things that I didn't expect and I just had no idea, but I was really pleased with in Korea was just how safe it was. I mean, I remember, you know, sometimes at 3 a.m. I would have a craving for a snack or something and be like, I'm just going to go to a convenience store. And I remember walking and knowing, like, nothing's going to happen to me. Like, I'm going to be completely fine. Like, I can just walk at 3 in the morning and, like, I know I'll be fine. And I always was, you know, and I did that more than I should have for snacks at that hour, but, you know.
Yeah, I think that is a big difference. Like, and when you're in one country for so much of your life, you forget that other countries do things differently. And things like mobility, transportation, safety in public are like other countries do it really well and do it differently.
And I think that's the thing too is I wish that more people, obviously people who are able to, of course, because traveling unfortunately is a privilege. I wish that everyone could experience it, but it is a privilege, honestly. I wish that everyone could experience it though, because it really does change your worldview and your view of your own country and things that, you know, your country can do better, which we've had a lot of discussions about as Americans.
So one final question as we wrap up this topic of expectations versus realities in going abroad. What do you think are some good ways for people to manage their expectations? Because it is easy to be disappointed and then maybe want to give up on being in that place because it didn't match what you wanted. So what are some ways of maybe, you know, managing those expectations before you go, or even adjusting once you get there and it's different?
I would say, and it's going to sound kind of cliche, but the not necessarily the easiest way, but the way with the best result would be to just have no expectations, to just go in with a completely clean slate and just say, I'm going to experience it as it happens and not have expectations. But obviously that's easier said than done.
I think that's impossible to a degree. Like,
unless you really just know nothing about the country, like me with Korea, I really just didn't know a lot. So that was easier for me. But with Spain or with France or a European country in general, since we know a lot more about them, typically that's kind of hard.
You can't avoid it, I mean.
Yeah, so I would say, I think that's great what you said about when you get there, kind of adjusting your expectations and also trying to keep them realistic. So, you know, don't have the expectation of, oh, it's going to be perfect and everything is going to be amazing and every day I'm going to wake up and be like, I'm in France. You know, at some point
you're going to have bad days.
You're going to have really bad days.
And you're going to have unexpected things happen.
Exactly. And also at a certain point as well, you're just going to get to the point, where it just becomes a normal routine. And I think that's the thing, is some people get disappointed with that, when in reality that's actually good, because it shows that you've really gotten into your new home, if that's what it ends up being.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's a good outlook. And I think managing your expectations before you go, it can be hard. And so I think that's my advice, is when you arrive in a place and it probably will be different than what you think, and nothing's going to match up perfectly, is like not being disappointed per se, but kind of taking it in stride and looking for positives maybe, and also looking at things in a more nuanced way. Like, because I also think our expectations can be very black and white and can be very like on paper, and then it's like real life is so much more, it's three-dimensional, it's dynamic, there's so much more to it.
Yeah. And
there's always something you can get out of a place. Like,
exactly. And I saw a really good quote too, that it said, wherever you are, well, it was something like, wherever you are in the world, there you are. So it's like, wherever you go in the world, you have to remember that it's you experiencing it. So whatever baggage or difficulties you had back home, you might still have them there. And I think that's something that a lot of people, they move to a different country and think it's just going to be rainbows and daisies, right? And it's not, because it's still life. You're still going to have to live life and pay bills.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that's also an important thing to realize, is that it's still going to be life wherever you go.
Right. The escapism versus travel and escapism and that mentality.
Yeah.
You have to kind of come to terms, like, you can't live that way.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. So in this section, we're going to talk about home, because something that I've really found as I've visited other countries, lived in other countries, is that there's this funny thing that happens when you fall in love with a place, you start to acclimate. Another country can start to feel like home in ways that your home country doesn't. And I've always found that really interesting, because you're suddenly being pulled in two directions. And then I also, we've talked about this. You've lived in 3 different countries. You felt more at home in some versus others. And I think we're both interested in finding a permanent place. And we both know that America, there's pros and cons, and there's things we prefer in other countries. And so there's also this point where you're deciding nothing's going to be perfect, but where do I feel most at home? So I guess to start off, like, what in your experience happened where you started to feel like, what are some things that happened to you living in a foreign country? Like, oh, actually, I could like see myself making this place my home, whereas America, like, I'll always belong there, but it's not quite the same.
Yeah, so I remember, actually, it's funny because I noticed even in myself how much I grew as a person in Korea, because I, for most of my life, have been an introvert, and I would say overall I still can be a lot of times.
Okay.
But I remember when I got to Korea, it was my first week of class, and the school bus driver picked us up, the kids and me, and took me home. And he asked me and said, "Do you want to come in for some coffee?" And the introvert in me was like, no. But then I thought to myself and I said, no, I'm in a different country. I need to branch out and, be social and stuff. And so I did. And
this is the bus driver?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was like,
so
okay.
Sweet. And we should preface this with, Sean was an English teacher in Korea.
Yes.
And in Spain.
Yes.
And so that was the role that you had, and you were teaching kids English.
So I did, and I'm really glad that I did, because it turns out his business partner was the mother of 2 of my students.
Okay.
So that was the first thing. And then I also found out that she has family. Her husband has, I think, 4 sisters, and 3 of them moved to Richmond, Virginia, and immigrated here.
That's crazy.
And we actually became best friends.
Oh.
And it was, I remember always thinking, if I had never said yes to that, I never would have met them. So I'm so glad that I did. And that kind of made me feel at home, because every Thursday, well, some weeks it was different, but at least once a week we would have a dinner together, and she would teach me new Korean food and make me coffee, and we would have a conversation exchange, a cultural exchange.
Yeah.
And that really made I honestly don't think it would have been even half as good of an experience if I hadn't met her.
Okay.
Because it made me feel very welcome in Korea, and it made me feel very welcome at the school, in my town, and I'm so grateful for that. So I think that was such an important experience to have.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm curious, so were there cultural elements, like in that experience or in Korea in general, that made you feel like at home in a way that maybe you hadn't felt as fitting in America? Or, like, what was your experience with that, where you're like, oh, I connect so much to something in Korea that I don't have back in America? Did that happen for you, or...?
I don't think that ever really happened in Korea.
In Korea, okay.
Yeah, I think... Yeah, I don't think... I can't remember anything like that ever happening. Really, in general, honestly, even in any of my experiences abroad.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just a very interesting experience because the job that I was doing in Korea is by nature temporary. I mean, theoretically, you could stay indefinitely, I guess, because you can renew, and I did renew 2 more times. But I guess it's kind of that nature of knowing that it is temporary.
Okay.
I didn't feel as much of a need, I guess, to make it my home. Whereas, for example, if I ended up moving to France, for example, you never know, for grad school, then that would probably be with the intention of making it my home. So I think that would be a very different experience than the ones I've had. Okay. Because all 3 times so far...
You went in with the mindset, like, this isn't going to be forever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
But I do remember us having a conversation where you had the thought of settling in Korea.
I did.
Like, what if... I don't know if you wanted to teach English there forever, but you were like, what if I did make this my home? And you moved past the temporary.
Yes.
But then you concluded... I don't know if you want to talk about this, but you concluded it wasn't going to work out. So could you talk a little bit about how you knew that it couldn't be your, like, forever home?
Yes. So this kind of ties into our next point as well, but we can give you a taster. So I kind of, for me, it was also difficult because I was in Korea during the COVID pandemic.
That's true.
So that was also something a bit difficult, and there was a lot of xenophobia towards foreigners in Korea, unfortunately. Okay. For example, I remember in Gyeonggi-do, which is the province around Seoul, kind of like a state, the province surrounding it, the mayor of that province actually basically passed an order saying that all foreigners in his state had to get COVID tested once a week. But Koreans didn't have to. So even if you were married to a Korean, if you were working with Koreans, as a foreigner, you had to get tested. And if you didn't, you would be fined. But Koreans didn't have to. Okay. So that kind of soured the view a bit for me. And then I did unfortunately have a lot of experiences where I would be walking down the road with my mask on properly. Yeah. And I would see someone and they would see me and immediately they would adjust their mask. But then when they would walk by me, they would pull it down, or they would walk by other Koreans and pull it down. So it kind of showed to me they don't view me as... It's like...
as part of the society.
Exactly. I'm obviously like another. I'm someone different. And to a certain extent, that's fine. I mean, it's my choice to live in a very homogenous country, but at the same time, that kind of ruined the view of, oh, maybe this could be my home a little bit. Okay. And also just the fact that I remember my Korean friends, they asked me and said, you know, would you ever immigrate to Korea? And I told them and said, well, I've considered it, but I asked them and I said, be honest, would people here ever view me as Korean? And they thought about it and they told me no. Yeah. You know, and that's the thing, you know, why would I want to live somewhere permanently where I'm always going to be kind of an outsider? Right. You know?
And what I find really interesting in this is that, you know, in a certain sense, when you're living abroad, you're always going to be a foreigner, but it gives you the chance to test out what that feels like in each place. And, you know, you've lived in 3 different countries, so you're getting to have this experimental kind of phase and kind of go, what feels good to me, what doesn't, and your experience in all 3 was very different. And I think that's really unique because, you know, when you're in your home country, you take life there and the way it operates very for granted, and it's natural, and this is how things are. And so you were getting to test out, well, what if I lived here? What would it be like? And kind of get to have that chance, which living abroad lets you do, and have that independence of thinking of, like, I could be here, I could be there. And
for sure. Yeah, and that's the thing is, even though that was kind of a hard realization to come to, I'm glad that I did, because it also made me appreciate so much more, you know, what immigrants go through in the U.S., for example. Like having to, and for a lot of people, you know, it's not a choice.
It's not a choice.
So for me, it honestly is kind of a privilege knowing like, and this is what I did, that I got to the point where I just got tired of being an outsider and a foreigner, and I said, okay, I'm just going to go back to my home, in my home country, and not everyone has that privilege, obviously.
Right.
So
and we're going to circle back to this topic in more depth in the last section, but because that comes up a lot. It's like one of the biggest things when you're living in different countries is your status compared to everybody else who's from that country. It's like one of the biggest things. I'll talk a little bit about my experience because, and I guess it's a bit unique for me in France. I haven't lived in other countries. Maybe I still will, but I knew for a while that I really wanted to be in France, and I think that's the unique aspect because I had never been there, but I was like, I know I want to be in France. And so a lot of my expectations, like I talked about, were met when I went to Paris for the first time. But it is true, like there were things that felt like I could make my home here, but then the second part of that was actually making it your home, and it's so much work. And there's so much of that process. And so it was really fun to be a student and to experience life in France as a student, but there was a level of, I didn't have to make my life per se. I mean, I had friends, I had activities, I had my studies, and I made a life there. But to really establish your place in a country, it takes so long. It's such an involved process, and there might, even if you feel at home there might be a point where you go, I can't do this anymore. I can't, like, it's not working to make it my home just because of what other struggles or challenges you face. So I think that's like an important distinction I found, is like you can feel really at home somewhere, but will that hold up when you're putting in all this effort and energy? Will that be able to carry you through? And like with Korea, you were like, no, it's not gonna it's not gonna happen. And so I'm going back now to France as a worker, and so it's gonna be a very different experience, and I'm gonna have to really fight to keep my place there.
Yeah, I will comment as well that's such a good thing to bring up, because it is very different living in a country versus being a student in a country.
Yes.
They're not the same thing, because as a student, it's kind of more fun. You're just doing classes. It's really easy to meet other people who are doing classes to similar goals, similar interests. But when you're just living there, and I was kind of saying this earlier, you're actually living there. You're actually having to do a day-to-day routine. You're going to have to go to work and, buy your groceries.
There's more expectations on you.
Yes.
There's more hoops to jump through, legal hoops, and like societal standards, I think, because when you're a student, and I experienced this living in France, people ask you, oh, what do you do here? What are you doing here? Oh, I'm a student. You almost get a pass. It's like you're still...
It's like, oh, okay.
It's like totally acceptable to be a student in a foreign country. And then when you kind of graduate to the next level of society, I think there's a bit more like, expectation. Well, if you're going to do a job here, like a naturalized, like a born citizen of this country, like you have to do it a certain way. There's expectation on you. And when you're a student, it's kind of like, I don't think there's the same expectations.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's very different. Feeling at home versus like making your home somewhere. And there's it's so rewarding when you succeed at making your home in a foreign country, because if you have an established home in a foreign country, looking at it, that you fought and gained every single thing that you have, because you earned it, essentially, which is really rewarding, even though it can be such a struggle.
For sure. Yeah, I do think that's very important to keep in mind.
Yes. And so I guess I'm going back to France. Do you see yourself in France potentially?
I could.
And for you, it's a mix of practicality and also being drawn to the country?
Yeah, because I do love a lot about France. I mean, every time I've been there, I love the language, I love the culture, I love the food, I love the architect. I
really want you to end up there.
I just love it all. And I also love so many of just their ideas. The idea that, you work to live your life, and not like the American, we live to work.
Right.
And I love how healthcare is affordable and accessible. I love how, like you were talking about, public transportation.
Yes.
And that's the thing. I love the U.S. I really do. There's so many things that I love about the U.S. Yes. I really do love this country. But there are some things where I'm just kind of like, healthcare. I could go into debt because I have cancer one day.
Yes.
Or, I get hit by a car and then that's it. What do I do? I'm disabled. It's so hard to get disability and things like that. And I don't know, just for me, I want to live in a society where the value is that you're not just deemed on how productive you are to society, you're also valued as a human being.
Yes.
So,
yes.
We'll see. I don't know.
I'd love for you to end up there. And I'm hoping I succeed in doing everything I want to do. And I guess to go back a little bit just to the idea of home is, like, when I traveled to France for the first time, I was surprised by how at home I felt in a place that wasn't where I was from. And I think it's that feeling and the connectedness that I felt that is going to help me push through all of the struggles and all of the challenges that come with establishing yourself in that country. And so that, I love how your home country can be so, like, that's where you're from, but it might not be the best fit for you.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I mean, there definitely are just things where I don't want to say they're deal breakers for the U.S., but they kind of also are. You know, the healthcare, the lack of a work-life balance and things like that. So we'll see. I'm not stressed about it. I know whatever is meant to happen will happen. So
yeah. All right. So we've made it to the last topic in our discussion, which is the biggest one. We might talk about this for a little bit because there's so much to it. But I mean, it's the all-encompassing thing when you travel and live abroad is being a foreigner, being the outsider. And so there's a lot of things I want to touch on here, but I want to start off by, and this is a debate that I've had with my own self through the years, when you get to that foreign country, maybe you speak the language, maybe you don't, but there's always going to be things that you're learning and figuring out. And when you're there as this foreigner, do you try to fit in? Do you try to match what everyone else is doing? Do you try your best to pass and to seem French, to seem Korean, as much as you can? Or do you kind of just go, you know, not doing that, I'm going to be my own person, I'm going to kind of do what works for me, and you don't even really try to fit in and to blend? Like, what do you do?
I would say for me in Korea, I definitely did make the effort to not necessarily blend in because, I mean, if we're being frank, like, again, as I said earlier, I can't. I'm obviously white. Like, Korea is one of the most ethnically homogenous countries in the world. I think it's like 99.9% Asian. So, obviously, if you're not East Asian, you're not going to visibly blend in. Although I will say that is changing a bit. I remember actually at the convenience store that I would always go to at 3 a.m., as I mentioned, the owner was actually Turkish. And he immigrated to Korea, and his kids were half Korean, half Turkish. Aww. And you could tell from looking at them, I mean, they spoke Korean perfectly, obviously, but you could tell they were not fully Korean.
Right.
So that's kind of an interesting conversation I think Korea will be having in the next couple years as that happens more and more. But I will say, I definitely try to respect their culture as much as I could, even for the things I didn't quite understand, like the hierarchy. You know, for me as an American, I'm just used to always calling everyone you. That's the word you. Yes,
like
the
we're all
word,
on the same page.
Exactly.
Like,
the word you in English is always okay. In Korean, it's not. You have to use someone's title. Sometimes it's even rude to say the pronoun you in Korean.
Okay.
So even though for me that's culturally kind of weird, honestly, I still try to be sensitive that it's, you know, I'm the guest and try to fit in. But I will say, having said that at the same time, again, obviously it's like when you realize you're never going to visibly look Korean, obviously, and not that I want to anyway, it's kind of like, at that point, you kind of think, well, do I want to keep trying? Yeah. And I honestly did get to that point where I just thought, why am I still trying to really integrate myself when clearly I'm always going to be viewed as a foreigner? I mean, I walk down the street and sometimes people would like secretly take pictures of me or videotape me, you know, because I was such like a spectacle to see this like white person walking.
So it's like, why even try to blend in other cultural ways when visibly I'm never going to blend?
Exactly. So although I did always still try even to the very end, definitely my last, I would say, year and a half of being there, I was just kind of, I'm just going to be respectful, but also I know who I am.
Right.
And I am American, you know, so.
And I'm not from here. And I think that's a good place to get to. And also, I think this is a big question because blending in, fitting in, it's a lot of work because, especially initially, because you don't know everything. It's not coming naturally. So all of the things that you've learned and techniques that you put in place to fit into a culture, you know, it's so much work to get there and so much effort. And so there's kind of a point where you're like, I'm tired. I kind of need a break. Whereas, in your home country, you're not putting in that mental energy. You don't really have to think about what you're doing. And I think when you see a foreigner in a place doing everything so well, every bit of that was effort and was a learned thing that had to take a lot of time and energy to accomplish.
Well, it's interesting that you said that too, because even thinking back, unfortunately, sometimes even in our countries, that's not the case. Because, for example, one of my friends, she's Chinese Canadian, and she was talking about how sometimes in Canada she doesn't feel like Canadian enough because she's not white, but then she went to China and she realized that she's not Chinese either. Yeah. So in that way, we are still kind of privileged because we don't have to, question that about our identity. So it really just depends on so many different factors.
It's true. It's very complex. And I guess never take your place or the role that you've made for yourself in a place for granted, because fitting in just feels so nice. It's just such an important part of your day-to-day life, and
to be included
and to feel like you belong and you're a part of a community, a society, a place. But I think, and this is where I'll answer the question, I got to a point with France where it stopped being worth it to put as much effort as I had been into my fitting in abilities, because with my French I would get very in my head, grammar wise, is this going to come across correct? I knew it would be a grammatically correct sentence, but will people hear it as correct? Because I know textbook wise it's correct, but will people,
does it flow naturally?
And people will not question it. And to be that level of in your head about something is just, it's taking up so much of your precious time and energy. And I kind of got to this point where I said, it's good enough, and already when I'm talking, people, accept me for who I am. So why am I trying to be a perfect foreigner? That's such an odd concept, because I never will be 100% French, but I'll always be this blend. And so I started to embrace that as I'll always be a blend of where I am, of where I've been and who I am and where I am now. And so it's never going to look 100% French. I don't think I would want it to, because that would take away from my other experiences. So then I started, this past trip I took last year to France, I changed my tune and I was like, I am who I am, and I'll be respectful and I'll be doing my best in society, but I'm not going to put pressure on myself to be a perfect French. I mean, that makes no sense. I'm not French. I'm a foreigner.
Exactly. Yeah, it's definitely a really complicated conversation, and something that even for yourself it's complicated.
And I would say it's different for every person, and for some people it's really, really important to have that identity where you're perceived as 100% belonging. And it took me a while to get to a place of, I guess, self-acceptance in that form of my identity, to be I'm okay with where I'm at, and I'm going to stop trying to be perfect.
I think that's really healthy.
Yeah, and so I'm really happy with that. And in your experience, did you feel in other countries outside of Korea that it would be more possible to make it in that country if you tried? What was your experience outside of Korea where you blended more visibly?
It's funny that you say that, because that was definitely one of my expectations in Spain. I thought that, okay, I'm obviously of European descent, I speak the language fluently, I've had experience here before, and I thought to myself, oh, well, it'll be relatively easy for me to blend in and to kind of make myself, not necessarily, like you said, convince people I'm Spanish, because I'm not.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, even if I became Spanish on paper, I mean, I didn't have that experience of growing up there, so I'm not Spanish. But I don't know, even just, I kind of realized that also wasn't possible, because with people staring at me and people, pointing out that I have an accent, and it's just I know I have an accent. You also have an accent.
I'm aware.
There are also a lot of different accents in Spain. Right? I mean, within all over the world, there's so many dialects of Spanish, but even within Spain, there are a ton of different accents. So that was something that kind of annoyed me a bit,
but there's always going to be differences.
Yeah. And that, I also got to the point, I will say much quicker than I did in Korea, where I was just I just don't care. I'm not Spanish, and I don't care.
And I'm over it.
Yeah.
And maybe also because you've lived in multiple countries, you're like, I've done this before.
I've danced this dance before.
Yeah, like I've done it before.
Yeah,
and it's just not worth it.
It got like, what's the word? Like it got kind of sped up. I was just like, okay.
It went quicker, yeah.
Yeah.
And so maybe we've already answered my second question, which is like, are you always the outsider? I'll give an example. Like I said, last summer I traveled to France, and it was for a trip. I hadn't been in a while. And one of my Airbnb hosts, a little town outside of Paris, I stayed at her home. She was, I think, in her 70s. She was originally from Germany. And she had lived in France for 60 years. She said, so I guess she was in her 80s then. I think she moved to France when she was in her 20s. And she was like, still kind of insecure about not seeming French. And I think maybe possibly with me, because I was also not from France, and so I would kind of ask her questions about her experience, and she'd be like, oh, but well, I've been here for 60 years, and she would always kind of try to assert like she was very French. And so it kind of made me think about like, is this everyone's experience? Is there a point where you always feel like the outsider, even if you've lived in a place like she did for 60 years? Like,
yeah, I think honestly, it's such a loaded question because it really depends on so many factors. It depends on what country you're talking about.
It does.
Because the reality is that some countries are more accepting of foreigners than others.
It's true.
It depends on what your race is, what your religion is, what your ethnicity is. It really just depends on so many factors.
It does.
And I think that, for example, the U.S., although of course we have so many issues with racism and xenophobia, not trying to discount that, the fact of the matter is that American is not an ethnicity.
Right.
It's not an ethnicity. It's not a race. So in theory, anyone can become American.
Yes.
And of course, there are a lot of people who say that's not true. And I don't agree with that opinion. I think anyone can be an American, obviously. And I mean, I remember even thinking when I was young, one of my best friends, her mom was from Venezuela. And I remember learning that and just thinking, oh, that's so cool. But I never once thought, well, she's not American.
She's not American.
Yeah, I was just like, oh, that's cool. She's from somewhere else, but she's here now. And I feel like that's the thing is a lot of European countries are ethno-states, which are built around a specific ethnicity. And even if you're, white per se, but if you're not that ethnicity, it's like, oh, well, you're not really one of us. Like with her, I'm assuming she was probably white.
Yes.
And even she, from a country that has a similar history, a related language, and even she didn't feel super French. So I think it's such a difficult question.
It really is.
So,
and it's funny because with a lot of other aspects of your identity, you can get to these points of self-acceptance because it is really based on your internal view of yourself and what you think of yourself. And so a lot of aspects of your identity, you can kind of work through, I accept myself for who I am. But I think foreignness is one of the hardest parts of your identity to wrangle because it's not just based on, or is it, what you think about yourself. It's really related to everyone around you. To society. And so, it depends on what society you're in. It depends on how they view you. And so I think it's this really complex thing of accepting yourself, and then do people around you start to accept you for being who you are? And so you're always an outsider, but you've made your place to belong as an outsider?
Yeah.
Because I feel like the way we talk about it is that when you're an outsider, you don't belong. And I wonder if there's somehow, in America, I feel like we do this well. It's like your outsider status becomes a part of your identity as American. And so, you're not from here, but you're still American. And that's kind of what I want to get to with France. It's like, I'm not from here, but I'm French, and I'm, because I'm living here and I've done so much here, but I'm never going to be 100% French, so I'm not going to try.
Right.
I'm going to accept my outsider status, but that's going to make me belong. It's kind of a contradictory thing.
No, but I understand what you mean. And I feel like, it is really difficult because I don't know. It's so complicated to even think about. But
it really, yes.
I think for me, my goal, if I did end up moving to France and wanting to live there long term, I think I would kind of have the same view as you that, I'd want to belong as much as I can and, for example, respect like laïcité and all of that. But at the same time, accepting that I wasn't born here, I wasn't raised here, I don't have the same experience that a French person would have had.
You never will.
And that's why it's really interesting because sometimes I feel like your experience in that country is more important than your ancestry. Because, for example, I'm of mostly British ancestry, but I'm not British, right? And, for example, someone who, for example, is Black British, they would be more British than me, obviously, because they were born and raised in the country, even though their ancestry isn't from there. So I think that's the whole concept. It's very difficult to talk about.
Yeah, and your identity is based on your place. And, yeah, I think it is the actions that you take that make you belong. And so, yeah, French, for instance, isn't my native language, but speaking it every day with people around me, it makes me more belonging to the environment, right? And so I think that's a cool way to think about it, because it kind of gives you back the power as the odd person out. It's like, I do have a power to belong, because it is based around the people around me, but also on the actions that you take to belong. And so it is so complex, and there's so much that you can talk about with it, but I really like that idea that you have a power there, and it's not just based on everyone's acceptance of you or not, which it can often feel like.
For
it's
sure.
Like they don't accept me, and they never will.
For sure. And I mean, that was kind of a bit of my experience in Korea, as I said, not in a hostile way, but kind of in just a passive, like, oh, well, you're not Korean, so you'll never be one of us. Because for them, being ethnically Korean and having that nationality is just synonymous.
And it seems to be like one of the most, highest thresholds of being Korean is like looking Korean.
Yeah.
Even more than like speaking the language fluently or knowing the cultural customs.
And that's the thing, not even just being ethnically Korean, even if you are, there's even a word in Korean called kyopol, which is someone who's ethnically Korean but is from the diaspora. So they even distinguish between ethnically Korean people who are born and raised in Korea and ethnically Korean people who are born and raised outside of Korea. They even have a different word for that. Okay. So that shows you, even for someone who's literally of that ancestry, like it's one of their people, but they're still kind of like, well, you're not really fully Korean. You're not Hanguk saram. You're Kyopol saram.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that also made me have the realization of like, they don't even view like ethnically Korean people from abroad as fully Korean. So how would they ever view me as Korean? So
you're just like a losing battle.
Yeah, exactly.
Like there's not even a word for me.
That's when I was like, there's no point.
I don't even have a word.
I'm just Weiguk saram. I'm just foreigner. So
there's so much more that we could talk about, and so to segue into the last question that I have, it's about, and we've talked about identity and the actions that you take. Another really important piece of the puzzle to belonging somewhere, I think, and I found in my own experience, is time. I remember going to France for my master's degree, and things weren't going super smoothly right away. I was feeling out of place, and I think I had this, I don't know where I got it, this expectation that I would fit in and I would feel French and I would feel part of things, like, I don't know, after a few weeks there. And it's like building yourself into a place takes time. Like, you're not going to become, a part of a place like overnight. Like, it's about knowing people and the actions that you take.
The customs.
And it just takes time to learn and to integrate yourself. And it's a long process. And so I think if you're going over and you're like expecting to blend in and be a part of things right away, you're not going to need it.
And exactly. I mean, even it's like small things that you wouldn't think about as someone who's not French and wasn't raised in that culture, like saying you have to say bonjour every time you walk into a store, and someone would immediately clock you, most likely as, oh, they're not French, if you didn't say bonjour as soon as you go into a store. So it's even small things like that, or like in Korea, like taking your shoes off in the house, or, I don't know, just holding things. When you hand something to someone older than you have to do it with two hands. You can't do it with one hand. You have to either do it like this, or you have to do it with two hands. And that's something that I never would have thought of until I saw that, and I was like, oh, am I supposed to be doing that?
Am I supposed to be doing that? No one told me.
Yeah.
And it takes so much time to learn all of these little quirky but really built-in things to the culture. Because
a lot of times, if you were to ask someone from that culture, what are some things I should do, a lot of times they probably wouldn't even know, like, because for them it's just their culture.
It's natural.
Yeah, like if I'd asked a Korean, oh wait, should I be doing this? They'd probably just think, oh, yeah, I guess you are supposed to do that.
I guess so.
Yeah.
I will say, going to France, it is kind of a lifeline culture-wise, I've found in France there's very structured ways of doing things, like you're saying, interactions, greetings, vocabulary that you use. It's like very consistent, the same every time. You go up to someone, you meet them, you do la bise. There's the vocabulary, bonjour, like the kind of structured way of talking to someone for the first time. And that's kind of a lifeline when you're like, okay, there's a formula to this, and I can learn the formula, and I can apply it every time, and then I'll get the hang of it. And that's kind of nice because, it gives you that structure where otherwise you might not know how to fit in. And I will say, knowing those little things, the little just
quirks,
embedded parts, it really makes a difference with how people perceive you, because it shows, and it shows that you put in time and effort, and
that you care about the culture, to be respectful
about the culture, and that you fit. And so that's very helpful, I think, in societies that have very structured ways.
I mean, so especially in Korea as well. Like, for example, you have to bow when you greet people, and for obviously as a Westerner, we just don't do that unless it's to a king, which we've never had. But so that was very odd to me, kind of like, oh, I guess, okay, I should be bowing. So that was definitely a culture shock, and, handing things with two hands, or, making sure you're using the correct language, because it's a very structured language.
The formal. Yeah.
So definitely it's the little things like that are just really important, and you have to make sure that there are things that might not seem super important, but as you were saying,
it means so much to people around you.
Yeah, and it really shows that you've put in time and effort, and even just doing things. I remember like participating in making kimchi, and
like with your students? Or
with my students at school, and they loved that, and they thought it was so cool, and it's something that it was kind of not strange, but very different for me. But I just thought, well, why not try it,
Yeah.
And it was really fun, and they loved it, and they loved that I did it. I remember wearing hanbok, which is the traditional Korean garb, and they loved that I wore it. So I think things like that are just really important.
So I guess to wrap up, we've talked about a lot of things, but obviously not everything having to do with being a foreigner in a foreign country. And this is, again, a loaded question, and it's similar to what we've talked about, but do you think that as a foreigner, you can succeed at making it in that country? Like, do you think that, there's a way for you to grab on to all of these little bits and pieces of culture that help you understand what to do, language, you integrate, society, friends, you integrate. Do you think you are able to make it as a foreigner living in this place, or there's always going to be a distance divide and maybe even a disadvantage because you're not from there? How do you think that works?
I would say it definitely is possible. I mean, even in a country like Korea, which I was talking about, really difficult to fit in there, there is an American YouTuber, and I was talking to you about her earlier. Her name is Megan Moon, and she's married to a Korean man, and she's lived in Korea now for over 10 years. She speaks Korean completely fluently. She actually just had twins with him, so their kids are biracial, and she made it work, and she immigrated, and she, has respected all the customs, but also definitely maintains her American identity. So I think that's something that's really hard to do, to find that balance of where do you try to be respectful, but also, you shouldn't have to give up everything about your home, your home culture. So I think that's kind of something really difficult to do.
Yeah, and I think you saying that, I think one of the most beautiful things that can happen, and this is like the ideal, I guess, is that you get so much out of being in this foreign country, this place that's new and different to you, and the people around you get something out of you too. Like, you being from a different place brings them value because you're showing them what their culture looks like. They don't think about it, but seeing it through your eyes, they can see it in a new way. And so I think that's the ideal and most beautiful balance, is like, you're getting so much out of being there, but your identity is different too, so you're not like everyone else, and you're able to bring something that you wouldn't, other people from that country wouldn't. So you're in this very unique, and I think that's easy to forget, that you bring value being in a foreign space, because there's so much that people can learn about the world through you that they wouldn't from another French person or Spanish person or Japanese person or whatever around them, because there is thinking the same, doing things the same, and that difference has value. And it's a lot of times downplayed. Difference does not bring value. Difference is negative, but it brings so much value just in changing perspectives and opening people's eyes. So
yeah, like for example, I remember when we had some exchange students at our university, UMW, I remember they were talking about healthcare, and you know, it always comes up with the US always, but it is a big thing, you know.
It is.
And they were asking, you know, why is healthcare so expensive? And I just
why is it so expensive?
Yeah, and I'd never been abroad before that point, so I just didn't know about how healthcare worked in other countries. And then after doing research and seeing, oh wow, it is really affordable in other countries, and there are other ways that we could be doing our system, you know, and kind of thinking, as you said, they as foreigners, as non-Americans, brought that perspective that I'd never thought of before. So I think that is so important for sure.
Yeah, and I think it enriches society in a way that just would never happen if just all the same people lived in the same place all the time. You know, if there wasn't movement, you know, I just think the human experience would be lacking so much. And there's just a richness of getting to experience other cultures and places. And if people didn't move around, like, we would not know about so much possibility, you know, culture-wise, practical, just functional-wise, healthcare, things like that. Just ways that things can be done. So, travel abroad, live abroad. That's the conclusion, I guess.
Yes, if you can, definitely. I mean, I would recommend trying to study abroad and live abroad, because they are both very different experiences. But I think it's good to have both.
And there are ways to do it affordably. And we were saying travel is a privilege. It is. But in a lot of ways, going for a more semi-permanent route is more affordable than like a vacation. You know, like, you made very wise travel moves based on, you know, your finances and like what could work for you. And so I remember, I think at the time when you were thinking like, oh, I'm gonna go to Japan, I might go to Korea to teach English, and I was just like, how is Sean gonna afford that? Because in my mind, that's so far away, that's so expensive. And that's the perception. I think, and you actually like made money from that. Like, you came out on top. So even, it can be expensive, but sometimes, in a lot of ways, it's not.
You can make it work for sure in a lot of situations.
There's always a way, I think, if you're really interested and passionate about it, to make it work. And it just changes your life forever. That's the final thought.
Like, it does. And it's funny, I remember seeing, I can't remember if it was a quote or from a book or something, but it was saying that after you've traveled, you'll never feel the exact same even when you're home. And I agree with that 100%, because even after coming back from Spain that first time, it was only 4 months, you know, as a student. And I remember just thinking, why do we do it this way in the U.S.?
Yeah,
why do we do this? Why do we do that?
All these questions.
And, you know, having reverse culture shock in your own culture and just realizing that. So that it really does affect your perception of not only the world, but of your own home country forever.
It does. It really does. And that's why I love talking to friends like you, because there's a certain point where other people in my life don't understand, and I'm not able to connect in the same way of seeing the world in that perspective, because they haven't traveled, they haven't lived abroad. And it is a really special privilege to be able to see the world, I think, through all these different lenses.
For sure.
So yeah, we encourage you to go abroad, to study abroad, to try out different cultures, and a lot can come from being uncomfortable and putting yourself out there as an outsider, but like we talked about, it's so rewarding, and so much can come from it. Do you have any final thoughts, Sean, as we wrap up? I don't think I do, but
I don't know. I guess I would just say, you know, go out there with an open mind, and you'll be surprised. And again, as we said earlier, with realistic expectations. And I think you'll be surprised at the experiences that you'll have.
And I think it is so important. Maybe this is my final thought, like, especially after COVID, I think it showed us like how important travel and moving around the world is. When we're all shut inside our home country and sometimes our homes just for months on end. And it was like, I think, really important realization, like, the world, like, we need each other. You know, we can't be completely cut off. It's not how humans work. Like, we have, like, we're meant to be going around.
We are social creatures.
We're social creatures, we're curious, and we're meant to be, like, moving around and exchanging ideas and, you know, meeting people. And we're really good at it. And so we should just do it as much as possible.
I agree.
So book that flight. I don't know.
If you can.
Yeah. right, thank you guys. Thanks
Thank
for
you guys.
watching.
Bye.
Bye.
Sound check.
Sound check part 2. It's so much quieter though without the
It
fan.
is.
Sean.
Let's see. Okay, let's check
Culture,
this one.
France. Okay.
We're getting used to no AC in France.